Here to dive into industry trends with leading ETF experts, this is ETF Spotlight with Nina Mishra.
Hello and welcome to ETF Spotlight. I'm your host Nina Mishra. My guests today are Dan Ives, Managing Director at Wedbush Securities, and Steve Gardner, Director of ETF Sales at ETFMG. We're talking about cybersecurity stocks and the ETFMG Prime Cybersecurity ETF, ticker symbol HACK. Dan and Steve, welcome to both of you and thanks for joining us today.
Great to be here.
Thanks for having me.
So this war in Ukraine, it remains front and center for investors. And we have seen that many commodities have seen these insane moves because Russia and Ukraine are, of course, major producers of many commodities. And it now appears that, unfortunately, this could be a long, drawn-out war because so many de-escalation initiatives haven't produced any productive results. And many experts have warned that a cyber war could outlast the physical war. And Dan, you wrote recently that you expect significantly elevated cyber attacks on the horizon. Tell us why.
Yeah, and we've already started to see that play out. A lot of our contacts in the Beltway, as well as talking to CIOs throughout the U.S., as well as many in Israel. Cyber warfare, when you look at bad actors, Russia, the vast majority of cyber attacks, really come from Eastern Europe, with Russia being a big state-sponsored cyber terrorism. And I think what we're really starting to see here is just going to add to the heightened risk that enterprise and governments are facing. We've seen a 20% plus move in terms of some of the threats facing enterprises even over the last 10 days. And I think what this does, and Stephen can hit on more, this is just going to add more and more growth to the cybersecurity industry. We think we could be looking at 23, 24% growth this year. That's almost 5x overall IT spend.
You're right about bad actors linked to Russia because several cyber attacks in recent years have been linked to Russian entities, which includes a high-profile ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline last year. And we know that Russia allows cyber criminals to operate within its territory. And as you talked about cyber attacks, recent cyber attacks, we have seen that cyber attacks appear to be a part of Russia's war strategy. We saw these attacks when Russia invaded Georgia, then Ukraine when it, in 2014, when it annexed Crimea. It had launched sophisticated cyber attacks. So far, this hasn't really happened in Ukraine, though we have seen some hacking from both sides. Some Ukrainian entities were hacked at the beginning of this war, and then there are many multinational hackers who are volunteering to help Ukraine counter Russian attacks. So do you think that companies and nations are better prepared this time, or do you think Russia has kept its most potent cyber weapons against companies and nations for later?
I think right now we've seen with shields up in the U.S., and I think the overall threat environment, companies are more prepared today. But a lot of that is because of the vendors. Many of those in the hack ETF, names like Zscaler, CyberArk, CrowdStrike, Palo Alto, in terms of overall companies in the cybersecurity industry that are really seeing the growth. And I think it's disproportional, the growth we're seeing. More and more governments, enterprises need to rely on these companies, which speaks to why it's such a big growth area.
Right. So last week, Google announced a deal to buy cybersecurity company Mandiant, and that would be for about $5.4 billion. And if completed, this would be one of the biggest acquisitions for Google. So do you expect more consolidation in this space after this announcement?
I think it's tip of the iceberg. In terms of M&A, we are going to see massive M&A in cybersecurity. I think Google, Mandiant, that's a shot across the bow. Companies like Microsoft, Oracle, Amazon, and others, they're going to have to do M&A. And look, you could really count on two hands the amount of companies that fit So I believe we're going to see a surge of M&A activity. I mean, names that stick out would be names like Varonis, Tenable, Rapid7, Ping as some potential M&A candidates. And I think this is really the start of not just a next growth phase of cybersecurity, but actually a consolidation phase in terms of M&A.
Right. You talked about increased spending on cyber products and services, and we know that our world is becoming increasingly digital and interconnected, and the risks of security breaches and threats that was rising even before this war. So talk to us a little bit about other tailwinds for the sector, and what kind of growth do you expect in the sector in the coming years?
I mean, to put in perspective, growth in cybersecurity is accelerating in 2022 versus 2021. Compare that with some of the other tech areas, especially work from home and some of the pull forward areas that's actually seeing a deceleration. We believe cybersecurity overall, it's about $1 trillion market over the next 5 years. And it speaks to why, from an investment perspective, which obviously everything Steve and his team does from an ETF, is it's going after these growth areas in cyber, because also what's happening in cloud. You look at the digital transformation of cloud, along with that comes the threats, the vulnerabilities, which is why cybersecurity, I believe, it's not just a hot sector. I still think, in my opinion, it's an undervalued sector, especially relative to the tech sell-off that we've seen so far this year.
So undervalued is very interesting because valuations, stretch valuations are one of the biggest concerns for investors lately, particularly in the rising rate environment. And I did see your note calling cybersecurity one of the most mispriced subsets of technology. Expand a little bit on that.
I mean, I view it relative to growth. I think what's happened in this market, tech has been painted with one brush, whether it's work from home e-commerce names or cybersecurity. And investors have basically sold them and head for the exits in really a mass fashion. And when I look at cybersecurity, relative to growth, it's the cheapest I've seen the names going back 2013. So I believe when you look at the valuations, and I think when you look at street numbers, which I think potentially underestimated by 10 to 15%, it's a golden age for cybersecurity, which is why, as many have sold tech, I think babies got thrown out with the bathwater, cybersecurity being one of those sectors.
Very interesting. Now let's talk about your favorite cybersecurity stocks. And I watched you on CNBC earlier this week calling Palo Alto a table pounder. So tell us why, and what are the other cybersecurities apart from Palo Alto that you like the best?
Yeah, and we have a basket of cybersecurity names, and many of those are in the Hack ETF. But when I look at Palo Alto in particular, I think that's a name. It's an install-based player. You're seeing a massive renaissance of growth on the cloud shift with Palo, accelerating growth. That could be north of 30% this year, and that's what I view as a mispriced asset. I think I view this base case $630, bull case $700 stock. And also, it's a free cash flow name. So even I've almost call it a defensive and an offensive name. Next to Palo, names that we love are Zscaler, CrowdStrike. Those are core cloud players. Also names like CyberArk, Varonis, and then you got an oldie but goodie, which is a name like Checkpoint, in terms of really starting to see more and more of these attacks, along with Tenable. That's really, in my opinion, probably my best way to play the federal government cybersecurity area.
So let's talk about your Hack ETF, because you mentioned Hack holds many of these stocks. Now, this is an interesting ETF because this has an interesting story, because this fund was launched days before the very high-profile breach of Sony Pictures that was in 2014, November 2014, and that was by these state-backed hackers from North Korea. So this was, in fact, one of the most successful ETF launches ever. This ETF had gathered $1 billion within just a few months of its launch. So talk to us a little bit more about this ETF, what it currently holds, and how the stocks are weighted?
Yeah, correct. So, a number of the names that, Dan and his team are very bullish on, fall into the portfolio, the likes of Palo Alto, Checkpoint, CyberArk, CrowdStrike, are all, in the top, 25 holdings in the portfolio. There's about 62 names in there, and it's weighted on a modified market cap. And you're absolutely correct. It had wild success right out of the gate with the news of Sony getting hacked, and we've seen both performance and flows kind of come in tandem with a lot of these headline pieces of news, with whether it be nation states hacking for espionage purposes. You have cyber criminals for illegal profit purposes, or even in the case recently of Russia and Ukraine, these hacktivists like Anonymous coming into the spectrum and really trying to do things for social purposes, and in the case of Russia, fight through their propaganda so the Russian people can see what is actually going on, and really disrupt the the Russian war engine as best they can via the internet. So over time we've seen not only growth from these event-driven circumstances, but really just growth across the board in terms of a lot of cybersecurity companies increasing revenue and starting to meet the requirements for our fund to be included in there, whether it be market cap or trading and liquidity purposes. And that's why we've seen, when we launched the ETF back in 2014, there are roughly 30 to 32 names in the portfolio, and since then it has doubled. So I think that's a real good validation of the growth within the cybersecurity industry, and the importance within the tech ecosystem of a lot of these cybersecurity names.
Great. So switching gears a little bit, I also wanted to talk about broader tech. Dan, you have been a tech analyst for more than 20 years, and I would say you're one of the best. So what are your thoughts on broader tech as of now? And we know that the NASDAQ is down about 18% year to date, though it has rebounded very strongly in the last 2 days. And for the purpose of reference, we are talking on Wednesday, March 16th. So what are your thoughts on outlook for the broader tech industry? And do you have any favorite technology stocks which investors should buy on this dip?
Yeah, look, I think since 99 doing this, I've seen a lot of cycles. And this is as nervous overall as I'd seen, probably going back to financial crisis from a tech investor perspective. I think it's a jittery, complex geopolitical environment, rising rate environment, of course, Fed raising 6 more on the way, it appears. And they've sold tech stocks indiscriminately. And I believe right now it's as oversold as I've seen tech in the last 5 to 6 years, which is my view that this, especially in areas like software, cybersecurity, especially a lot of the core tech stalwarts. We love Amazon, love Microsoft, as well as Google as a play also on cloud. Apple continues to be our favorite. I believe software, led by names like Microsoft, but also names like Oracle and others, combined with some of the large caps in cybersecurity, I believe this is probably as, I'll call it a pound the table moment as I've seen for tech since March 2020 when COVID hit. So we're bullish here. It's a white knuckle period. But I think when you look at the secular stories, you own tech here, you don't sell them.
Excellent stuff. Pound the table moment for technology. Great. That's all we have time for today. Dan and Steve, thank you again for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
That was Dan Ives of Wedbush and Steve Gardner of ETFMG. So let's quickly recap the tickers that were mentioned on this podcast. The cybersecurity stocks that Dan likes are Palo Alto Networks, ticker symbol PANW, Zscaler, ticker symbol ZS, CrowdStrike, ticker symbol CRWD, CyberArk, CYBER, BR, Tenable, TENB, and Checkpoint Software, ticker symbol CHKP. And from the broader tech, he called this a pound the table moment for tech since March 2020. So he likes Microsoft, ticker symbol MSFT, Apple, AAPL, and Oracle, ORCL. We talked about the Hack ETF, which holds all the cybersecurity stocks that Dan likes. The ticker symbol is HACK, HACK, and other popular cybersecurity ETFs that are worth a look are, there's one by First Trust. It's the First Trust NASDAQ Cybersecurity ETF, ticker symbol Cyber, CIBR. There's one by iShares. Its ticker symbol is IHAC, iShares Cybersecurity and Tech ETF. There's one by GlobalX. The ticker symbol is BUG, BUG. And in full disclosure, I own iHack in the ETF investor portfolio that I manage. Thanks for listening. If you like our show, please leave us a rating on iTunes or wherever you get your podcast, and also make sure to subscribe so that you do not miss any episode. And if you have any comments, questions, or suggestions, please email podcast@zacks.com.
This material is being provided for informational purposes only, and nothing herein constitutes investment, legal, accounting, or tax advice, or a recommendation to buy, sell, or hold a security. Do not act or rely upon the information and advice given in this podcast without seeking the services of competent and professional legal, tax, or accounting counsel. Publication and distribution of this podcast is not intended to create, and the information contained herein does not constitute an attorney-client relationship. No recommendation or advice is being given as to whether any investment or strategy is suitable for a particular investor. It should not be assumed that any investments in securities, companies, sectors, or markets identified and described were or will be profitable. All information is current as of the date herein and is subject to change without notice. Any views or opinions expressed may not reflect those of Zacks Investment Research as a whole.